it's important to mention that most thyroid conditions are autoimmune in nature. Approximately 90% of people with hypothyroidism have Hashimoto's, similar with Graves. In the case of low thyroid and hypothyroidism Hashimoto's, typically the medical doctor will give thyroid hormone replacements. And usually it's synthetic T4. And again, there's a time and place for that. I'm not saying people don't need that. The problem is that's the only thing they do. The reason it's a problem is because if you have one autoimmune condition, you have a greater risk of developing other autoimmune conditions in the future. So if someone is just taking thyroid hormone replacement and they're not doing anything to improve the immune system, then over time you're more susceptible to developing other autoimmune conditions, whether it's multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or lupus.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about natural solutions for hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Eric Osansky. Dr. Eric is a chiropractic physician, certified functional medicine practitioner, nutritionist, published author, and podcast host who has helped thousands worldwide understand and manage their thyroid health. You can reach Dr. Eric at his website, savemythyroid.com, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Dr. Eric. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, really excited to be here and yeah, excited for this conversation.
Thank you. And I love to learn new things. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? And so today we're going to be talking about how to heal our thyroid. But before we get into that, is it okay if we just take a step backwards and can you give us a little thyroid 101 lesson? So maybe not everybody is aware of what our thyroid does for us and then what problems start to happen when it is malfunctioning.
Sure. So yeah, the thyroid gland is it's a butterfly shaped gland in the center of the neck and it there are thyroid receptors in most cells and tissues of the body, and there are a few different thyroid hormones, but T4 and T3 are the main two thyroid hormones. And as far as the function of the thyroid hormone, so many people know that it plays a role in metabolism, but also controls heart rate, plays a role in bone density. If you have too much thyroid hormone, like hyperthyroidism, then that could cause lower bone density. If you have too little thyroid hormone, it could affect bone quality. It could affect mood. In some cases, cause anxiety. Other cases, cause depression. Even cholesterol. If you have hypothyroidism, low thyroid hormone, you could have high cholesterol. And a lot of doctors will just look at cholesterol, look at a lipid panel, cholesterol, LDL, and will just automatically recommend a statin without looking at the thyroid. Could affect kidney function. So yeah, the thyroid controls like I said, there are receptors pretty much everywhere in the body.
So when we're thinking about, you talk about testing. So we go to the doctor, we say, something doesn't feel right here. I'm going to go and I'm going to get tested. And then they might find something like, oh, this is too high or this is too low. And then without taking another step, start to try to work on those symptoms. And I think what you're trying to help people be aware of is let's go a little bit more to the source and say, all right, this is what's happening in your body. And it might be because your thyroid is producing too much or too little of the hormones that are basically giving instructions throughout our body. And when it gives bad instructions, our body says, okay, I'll do what you tell me to do. And it doesn't serve us very well, right?
Exactly. You're exactly right. And I mean, there's definitely a time and place for symptom management, which is what most medical doctors do, most endocrinologists do. But you're right. They're usually not addressing the underlying cause of the problem.
I absolutely want the symptoms to go away. That's why we
Yeah.
go to the doctor. But I think if we can address the root cause, that also takes care of the symptoms. So we're not only taking care of symptoms, we're taking care of both. We got kind of two birds with one stone thing going on. Okay, so the problems with the thyroid, we usually go down one of two branches. One is too much too much function. We have an overproduction, so hyperthyroidism. And then we have not enough, which is hypothyroidism. They both cause
Yeah.
problems, but they're different problems.
So what hypothyroidism, and again, hypothyroidism is more common than hyperthyroidism, and typically you'll have low thyroid hormones. Sometimes they'll be below the reference range, but many times they're within the lab range, but on the lower side. And then you have TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which communicates with the thyroid gland. And in the case of low thyroid hormone, you have increased TSH levels because it's telling the thyroid gland, hey, we need more thyroid hormones. Pituitary gland is secreting more TSH. And so with hypothyroidism, you typically have high TSH and you have low thyroid hormones. Hyperthyroidism is the opposite. With hyperthyroidism, you have too much thyroid hormone, too much T4, too much T3. And as a result, the pituitary gland is trying to put the brakes on the production of thyroid hormone. It's trying to slow down the production or inhibit the production of thyroid hormone. So you usually have low, or in many cases, undetectable TSH levels. So in hyperthyroidism, again, you have high T4, T3, low TSH. And so that's really on a blood test, the difference between hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. And then there's Hashimoto's versus Graves' disease, which I don't know if you want to get into that, the
Oh,
difference
yes,
between those
please. Because
two.
here we're getting into some of the names. So, like, you go to the doctor, you get diagnosed. They're going to say something like, okay, I have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, or I have been diagnosed with Graves. And so, those I think are terms that people are going to say, oh, yeah, 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 I've heard of that before. Because I think sometimes we talk about the medical stuff and people are like, whoop, lost me there. I have no idea what you're talking about. And you mentioned about the interaction with the pituitary, and I mentioned when we had a little chat before, this is personal to me. My daughter still has actually cancer in her pituitary. And she had surgery and they removed a tumor, but it did affect her thyroid. So she
Mhm.
has Hashimoto's. That connection where when this part doesn't work, it affects this, which affects your whole body, and it's pretty frustrating. So let's say, Graves, if I'm correct, Graves' disease is hyperthyroidism, and Hashimoto's is that hypothyroidism. So too low, not enough. And that's what my daughter has. So let's say, okay, here we are. We're living it. We've gone to the doctor. We've done our best stuff. Here's the diagnosis. Now what?
Yeah, so real good question. What's the next step when someone has that diagnosis? Because you're right, with Hashimoto's, it's more hypothyroid, and you have different antibodies associated with Hashimoto's. And then with Graves' disease, it's hyper, and again, you have different antibodies associated with Graves. But when it comes to the treatments, uh, unfortunately, most medical doctors don't really do anything for the autoimmune component. And it's important to mention that most thyroid conditions are autoimmune in nature. Approximately 90% of people with hypothyroidism have Hashimoto's, similar with Graves. With hyperthyroidism, about 90% of people have Graves' disease. And in the case of low thyroid and hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, typically the medical doctor will give thyroid hormone replacements. And usually it's synthetic T4, levothyroxine, with Synthroid being the most common brand. And again, there's a time and place for that. I'm not saying people don't need that. The problem is that's the only thing they do. And the reason it's a problem is because if you have one autoimmune condition, you have a greater risk of developing other autoimmune conditions in the future. So if someone is just taking thyroid hormone replacement and they're not doing anything to improve the immune system, then over time you're more susceptible to developing other autoimmune conditions, whether it's multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. So that typically is the treatment for Hashimoto's and other types of hypothyroidism, given thyroid hormone replacement. With Graves, there are three options. So one option is medication, anti-thyroid medication, which blocks thyroid hormone production. Sometimes they'll give beta blockers as well to help lower the heart rate. Uh, so that's one option. Number two is radioactive iodine, which is when they use pretty much radiation to destroy the cells of the thyroid gland to try to make someone hypo. just because, again, they're more concerned about the hyperthyroidism, not as concerned about the hypothyroidism. And then there's thyroid surgery where they remove the thyroid gland. And again, the person becomes hypo, so the person then ultimately is on thyroid hormone replacement. So again, there's time and place for anti-thyroid medication. There's time and place for surgery. But I mean, surgery arguably should be the last resort. Same thing if someone chooses radioactive iodine after everything else has been tried. I mean, depending on the situation, if someone has another thyroid condition, let's say they have a goiter, like a very large thyroid gland, and it's causing obstruction, and the person has difficulty swallowing, breathing, again, maybe in that case, surgery is required. Some cases of cancer, certainly, surgery is required. But with Graves, again, remember, it's autoimmune. So you remove the thyroid gland and you're doing nothing for the immune system. And the person's on thyroid hormone, which is understandable if they have that thyroid gland removed. But, again, what's missing is, as we mentioned earlier, not doing anything to address the underlying cause of the problem.
I appreciate that we have lots of options to be able to help balance what needs to be balanced. But a lot of the things include destroying, removing, uh, inhibiting. And I would love if there were also some solutions that helped heal, build,
Definitely.
restore. So, are there some possibilities that follow that path?
Yeah, so of course, yes, that's what I did when I dealt with Graves' disease back in 2008 into 2009. I went to a medical doctor first to get diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, went to an endocrinologist who gave me the official diagnosis of Graves, and she did recommend anti-thyroid medication, which in my case I didn't take. Again, I work with a lot of people who take the meds, so I'm not against it, but there are also natural ways of managing the symptoms. But the big key, it doesn't really, I mean, if someone needs to take the meds, they need to take the meds. If someone managed it naturally, that's fine. Same thing with Hashimoto. Someone needs to take thyroid hormone replacements. But yeah, exactly. You want to heal. You want to reverse the autoimmune component of Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, or in some cases both, because some people do have the antibodies for both Graves and Hashimoto's. And so, but either way, you want to optimize the immune system, heal the person, find and remove the triggers, heal the gut. And yeah, I'm not saying it's easy to do that. It sounds a lot easier just to take a pill and say, okay, I'm just going to take thyroid hormone and live happily ever after, or I'm just going to take anti-thyroid medication for a few years and hope that will help.
And when that is the solution that people choose, I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. If you're happy with um, the way that you're handling it, you're happy with your results, that is awesome. And I have a friend who had her thyroid removed, and she is grateful for the relief that that has provided, and she is okay with it. No problem with that. But what if I am looking for another way? What if that solution doesn't feel good to me?
Yeah, I mean, again, there is hope. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, some people get the surgery and they're happy with the decision. There are some people that get radioactive iodine, they're happy with the decision. Some people with Hashimoto's take thyroid hormone and they're happy with the decision. So, and that's perfectly fine. But then there are people that take thyroid hormone, they don't feel well, they don't feel optimal. And, or again, maybe they feel good, but they know that they're at risk of developing other autoimmune conditions. Similar with Graves, maybe they feel fine taking the medication, but they know that there's something else. Yeah, so there are options. There's what's called the triad of autoimmunity, which also known as the three-legged stool of autoimmunity, and that involves a genetic predisposition, exposure to one or more environmental triggers, and an increase in intestinal permeability, also known as a leaky gut. And we can't change the genetics. We can change the expression of genes through diet and lifestyle. And it's important, of course, for anyone dealing with really any health condition to eat a healthy diet, to manage their stress, to get sufficient sleep. But then also, many people need to go beyond that. Finding, removing triggers is important. There's different triggers. I talk about four categories of triggers: food, stress, environmental toxins and toxicants, as well as infections, and and then and then infection. So our, yeah, well, th those are the four categories of triggers. And then the leaky gut, the increased intestinal permeability is that third component of the triad of autoimmunity. So finding, removing triggers, healing the gut. Again, I make it sound easy. It's definitely not easy, but in my opinion, it's worth addressing, finding and removing those triggers, healing the gut, like you said, healing the person, rather than just managing the symptoms.
Okay. So it sounds like you want people to understand from the beginning, if you're looking for easy, then perhaps your solution is to take a pill. But if you feel like it's worth it, then here are some things that we can work on. And you talked about the three-legged stool, the genetics, and we can't change our basic DNA, but we can change. And I love the way that you put it. What the word that popped into my head is epigenetics, that part that's on top that turns things on or off. That part we can change. It used to be years ago when they talked about genetics, it's like, well, my life is over. There's nothing I can do about it. And now we realize, okay, it is what it is. And oftentimes we can do something about it. There is hope. It doesn't mean, throw up your hands and, put up that white flag and say game over. When we change things like diet, lifestyle, stress, triggers, it does affect on a cellular DNA level the way that our body responds. So I hope people realize we don't have to throw in the towel. We don't need that white flag. There is something we can do about it. And you also talked about triggers, and I would love to go a little bit more into those in a minute. And then also the leaky gut. And our gut health seems to affect pretty much everything. And I you talked about the four categories of food, stress. Was it infection and toxins? Did I get those right or did I miss one?
You got it. Nope. Those are, yep.
So for in the case, because I did mention my daughter does have Hashimoto's, and for her at this point, she is able to manage some of the symptoms through diet. So gluten is out, and there are other things that are triggers that seem to just inflame and cause more problems. So uh, so from our personal experience, I mean, we're living what you're talking about right here and right now. And so I guess that can act as a second witness, right? So let's go over some of those again. Food, what other kinds of foods can be triggers and can cause problems?
Yeah, so besides gluten, because gluten is probably the biggest one, and most natural healthcare practitioners do recommend for people with different types of autoimmune conditions to avoid gluten. Dairy also, I mean, some of the common allergens doesn't mean it negatively affects everybody, but gluten, dairy, corn are three of the big ones. Corn has actually been shown to, in some people, elicit a gluten-like response, like a celiac-like response. Celiac is autoimmune, and not saying you could have autoimmune reaction necessarily to corn, but you could have a pretty bad reaction. And even if it's, some people might listen might say, well, how about if it's organic, not GMO? Because again, most of the corn in the United States genetically modified. But yeah, even organic corn, it's not the fact that it's genetically modified, but just that it is a common allergen. Uh, Nightshades in some people, so eggplant, tomatoes, peppers. Again, those are healthy food, but in some people they have compounds which could negatively affect gut health in some people, cause inflammation in some people. So, I mean, obviously we know like refined, I probably don't have to mention, but I will, like refined foods and sugars, unhealthy oils, fast food, things like that. We definitely want to try to minimize and really avoid while healing. But yeah, again, everybody's different. I do recommend avoiding grains while healing. It's not like I never eat grains in a state of wellness, but grains could be a little bit harsh on the gut. So usually recommend taking a break from grains. Pretty much there's no single diet that fits everyone perfectly, but sometimes it can be a challenge to figure out which foods are a problem in different people. So the approach I take and it's an approach a lot of practitioners take is to put someone on an elimination diet where you're eliminating some of the more common foods and more common allergens and foods that can negatively affect health, gut health, have them avoid those foods for a few months and then slowly reintroduce them and just see how they react one at a time.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question is if it's not one size fits all, one answer. And when you talk about, okay, junk food and processed food, and then we talk about, okay, people are probably going, yeah, okay. And then our let's see, what was the other thing? The common allergens, like the some of the grain issues and some of the others. But then when you say and nightshades, which are tomatoes and peppers and eggplant. I mean, that is counterintuitive because that's usually what's considered the healthy kind of a food. So, would a person go to someone like you and say, here are some common allergens. Let's try getting rid of these for a little while and then see how your body responds to it? Or how do they know what they're supposed to do?
I mean, ideally, I mean, they would want to work with someone. I mean, it's not like people can't do things on their own. And I do talk about this in my books, Hashimoto's triggers for those with Hashimoto's, and I have the hyperthyroid healing diet for those with hyperthyroidism. So that does provide some guidance without having to work with a practitioner because again, it's always great to work with someone, but we can make dietary changes on our own. It's just like you said, how do I know what dietary changes I need to make, especially since there's different. So yeah, I give like different guidelines in the books and yeah, I mean essentially with Graves and Hashimoto's, there's what's called an autoimmune paleo diet or AIP diet, which is pretty common. So some people will start with that. So if someone finds that to be too restrictive, they might just follow a regular paleo diet, which is pretty good as well. And both of those involve eating whole, healthy foods, avoiding a lot of the common allergens. And so those like alone are two like starting points. Even without the book, people can do some research on AIP diet, paleo diet, and start there. But yeah, it's always great to work with someone because people are always asking for guidance too about reintroducing foods and how do I know if I'm when I reintroduce a food if I'm reacting like what do I look for when I reintroduce foods and so yes and I mean there's also another thing I should mention, which some practitioners do, they do food sensitivity testing where they'll run a panel and see what foods people react to. And I'm not against those panels. I mean, I've had them done on myself too. They're not completely reliable. I mean, there's no perfect way. Even elimination diet's not perfect either. But a food sensitivity test, unlike an elimination diet, they could be pricey for the ones that are more accurate. They're more expensive, and even those I wouldn't say are completely accurate. So someone could spend hundreds of dollars on the testing, and it could give false positives, false negatives, and so I that's not usually where I start. Usually I start with elimination diet, but I'm not opposed to looking into food sensitivity testing down the road if we have struggle to figure out what food someone's reacting to.
Yay, you gave us some action steps. Here's something you can do as a next step. And I am so grateful because if I feel like I have a problem and no solution, then I feel hopeless. But I feel like, okay, here's a problem and here's something I can do about it. At least the next step, that's helpful. It helps me feel like I am not completely out of control. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm going to repeat those and you correct me if I've missed anything. But you said, okay, one thing is we can go ahead and we can Google or do an AI search and we can talk about a paleo diet and how that can help us, or the AIP diet. So, okay, I can check this out and see if this is going to be a good fit for me. And you have books that are specific to these issues. So those are some great resources that people can go to and then learn what is my next step with my issues. And again, if anybody's listening and thinking, wow, this sounds like a pain, I'd rather take a pill, that's okay. That's okay. Those solutions are great too, but this just gives us some more options. And I appreciate that now we have some steps. Okay, I can do this. I can do this. Now, one thing about the diet is it almost seems like two birds with one stone as we're talking about leaky gut and healing the gut. Our food and what we're doing is very important in giving our gut a chance to heal. So, do you want to talk? Are there additional things you do to help leaky gut besides the diet, or is that just kind of a do one, take care of two?
No, there are other things that can cause a leaky gut. I mean, going back to the diet, I agree though. Like there are like even just starting with avoiding gluten. So if the steps that we mentioned, like if someone's like, well, AIP, even paleo is a bit, I'm used to eating what I like to eat every day, just pay and then again the books also, yes, they give guidance, but even just starting by avoiding gluten in some people can make a big difference. Everybody's different. Some people will avoid gluten and be like, you know what, I don't really feel any better, and that's fine. But going gluten free in a lot of people could be beneficial. But can even if it's you're not feeling better, gluten has been shown to increase permeability of the gut to contribute to that leaky gut. So even if you feel like it's not benefiting you to avoid gluten, it is
Might
because
be.
again, yeah, well, again, you might not be, maybe you're not sensitive to it, but it still can potentially affect that gut. But there are other things as well. I mean, unfortunately, the toxic world we live in, a lot of the toxins, like we're exposed to microplastics. I mean, everywhere there's plastics, and now we hear about microplastics and nanoplastics in the water, in the food supply, and they've been shown to increase permeability. There's glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup. That's been shown to cause some dysbiosis imbalances in the gut flora. Certain medications also can disrupt the gut. Antibiotics can increase permeability of the gut. Again, there's a time and place for them, but that's why you want to be cautious. You don't want to just again, I'm not giving medical advice here. Again, I've taken antibiotics. Most people listening to this probably have. So again, time and place, but you just want to be cautious with when taking medications, realizing that could cause increased permeability. Certain infections can cause permeability, increased permeability, like parasites, H. pylori. There's another one, Yersinia enterocolitica. So infections. I mean, to some extent, even stress can negatively affect the gut. A chronic stress we're talking about. But yeah, many times it does go beyond the diet. So diet's important, but can you eat a perfectly healthy diet, if there is such a thing, and still experience a leaky gut? Yeah, you could because of some of these other factors. So it sounds overwhelming because it's like, hey, we live in a toxic world. There's no way I could avoid all the exposure to plastic and glyphosate and mercury and all these other things which affect our immune system and our gut. And you're right, you can't completely avoid it, but it does help to minimize our exposure by reducing our toxic burden. It does definitely help. And so, yeah, try not to get overwhelmed because no matter what you do, you're not going to completely avoid these these leaky gut triggers, as I call them sometimes. But you can minimize exposure to them, which definitely could make a big difference.
I appreciate you mentioned let's try not to get overwhelmed because it can feel kind of, well, I can't think of a better word than overwhelming, where there's so much. But if we can make help our bodies to be able to not have that overload. Our bodies are amazing. They're amazing the way that they're designed to, help us be healthy, to heal itself, and really to take out the trash as long as there's not too much trash. So we can trust our bodies. They're amazing. And let's help them help us by taking good care of it. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we cover today? Do you want can they find your books on your website? Is that a good way, or do you want to give more information about that?
I mean, they could visit my website, but they could also find them on Amazon. Just if they search my name, if they search hyperthyroidism, there's not a lot of hyperthyroidism books, so they'll probably come across my books. But yeah, one other thing I definitely want to talk about briefly is stress. Just like, we just because I think a lot of people overlook the impacts of stress on our health. And when I dealt with Graves myself, stress was a big factor. And it wasn't just the emotional stressors. I mean, that definitely is important, the daily chronic stress that a lot of people deal with. But I was also overtraining. I wasn't listening to my body prior to my Graves' disease diagnosis. I wasn't running marathons or anything like that. I was just going to the gym and I was wiped out, quite frankly, after my workout. And at the time, I was like, okay, that's to me that was a good workout. I feel, but looking back, and I should have known better with my background, but yeah. So emotional stressors, physical stressors, and I did an adrenal saliva test, and it wasn't until I did the testing that was convinced that because I honestly up until that point thought I was doing a good job at managing my stress, but then when I saw everything was low, my cortisol was low, my DHEA was low, my secretory IgA was low, I realized that yeah, stress was definitely a factor, and I was overestimating my stress handling abilities. So I don't want anybody else to make the same mistake and overestimate their stress handling abilities or underestimate the stressors that they're dealing with in their life.
Stress is huge, and I'm grateful that you brought that up. And we talked before about how our body is designed to heal itself, and it has different functions. And when we're in that state of chronic stress, our body is trying to do its best, our body, our brain, everything. It's like, okay, let's take care of this tiger, so to speak. Let's take care of this immediate problem. And to our mind, our body, everything is a tiger, everything is a bear. It's an immediate thing. And when it does that and it's in that state, then it turns off other systems like our digestive system, our immune system, our growth processes. There are certain things because that's not as important as escaping from the tiger. But when we have a tiger 24/7 and our body never turns back on our immune system and our digestive system, it causes havoc everywhere. And it's interesting that every natural thing that we've talked about to try to heal it is to support that immune system. It works with the digestive system. So the stress can counteract every other good thing that we're doing. I would even say that well, I don't know. It is first, but you got to start somewhere. So wherever you start is a good first step. But we can't underestimate how important it is to be able to manage our stress, to be able to get our body to function properly. And it's turning on our systems. It's supposed to heal. Our body is supposed to heal itself. But we can inhibit those natural systems and cause more problems for ourselves. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay. And to find your book, I can include links to the book too on Amazon. So we can do that as well. Well, thank you so
Okay,
much for
thank you.
visiting with me today, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Appreciate you having me on, and really, again, enjoyed this having this conversation on hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, hypothyroidism, and Hashimoto's.
Thank you. I'm sure a lot of people are so grateful because this applies to so many. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Hippocrates. He said, "Everyone has a doctor in him or her. We just have to help it in its work." The natural healing force within each one of us is the greatest force in getting well. Our food should be our medicine. Our medicine should be our food. Today, I invite our listeners to help our inner doctor do its work. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for tuning in to Linda's Corner podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends to help us inspire even more listeners. Be sure to visit hopeforhealingfoundation.org for free and affordable resources to help you overcome life's challenges. And explore healingbreathworkdetox.com, where you'll find transformative tools for deep inner healing and lasting change. Also, don't forget to check out my books, Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. Your journey to hope, healing, and happiness starts here.